The late 1990s in America painted a complex picture of social change and lingering prejudice. While TV shows like Will and Grace were just beginning to bring gay characters into American living rooms, the reality for LGBTQ+ people, especially in rural America, remained challenging. It was in this setting that a crime in a small Wyoming town would shake the nation's conscience. To understand the impact of Matthew Shepard's story, we must first understand the America of 1998. The internet was just becoming mainstream. Bill Clinton was president, and the country was riding high on economic prosperity. But beneath this prosperity, deep divisions remained. Gay marriage wasn't legal anywhere in the country, and in many states, you could legally be fired just for being gay. Wyoming, nicknamed the Equality State for being the first to grant women the right to vote, had a complicated relationship with equality. Its sparse population of about 480,000, spread across vast landscapes, created tight-knit communities where everyone knew each other, but also where being different could make you stand out in uncomfortable ways. Matthew Wayne Shepard entered the world on December 1, 1976, in Casper, Wyoming. His parents, Dennis and Judy Shepard, welcomed their firstborn son with joy, followed by his brother Logan a few years later. From the beginning, Matt was different, not in any obvious way, but in the subtle ways that parents notice. He was sensitive, kind, and smaller than other kids his age. Matt was the kind of kid who would give you his last piece of candy, his mother Judy would later recall. He just had this innate sense of when someone needed a friend. His early years in Casper were marked by typical small-town American experiences: church on Sundays, family dinners, and playing with neighborhood kids. Dennis Shepard's job in the oil industry provided the family with a comfortable middle-class life. Matt attended public schools in Casper, where he showed an early interest in politics and current events. His teachers remembered him as bright and engaged, always ready to participate in class discussions. But Matt's life took an unexpected turn when his father's work took the family to Saudi Arabia during his teenage years. The move exposed young Matt to different cultures and perspectives, broadening his worldview beyond the Wyoming borders. While overseas, he attended the American school in Switzerland, TASIS, where he studied German and Italian alongside his regular courses. It was during his time in Switzerland that Matt began to more fully understand his sexual orientation. Like many gay teenagers in the 1990s, he struggled with when and how to come out to his family and friends. When he finally told his mother he was gay, her response was one of acceptance and love, though she worried about the challenges he would face in a world that wasn't always kind to those who were different. What many people don't know about Matt's story is that his time in Europe wasn't all positive. During his senior year at TASIS, Matt experienced a traumatic event that would affect him deeply. While on a school trip to Morocco, he was beaten and raped by a group of young men. The attack left both physical and emotional scars that would haunt him for the rest of his life. After the assault, Matt struggled with depression and panic attacks. He returned to Wyoming, where he began seeing a therapist to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite these challenges, he worked hard to move forward with his life. His friend Romaine Patterson later said, "Matt never let that experience define him, but it definitely shaped how he viewed the world and his own safety." In 1998, Matt enrolled at the University of Wyoming in Laramie. The town, with its population of about 27,000, was known as a relatively progressive pocket in conservative Wyoming. Home to the state's only four-year university, Laramie attracted students and faculty from across the country, creating a more diverse community than many other Wyoming towns. For Matt, Laramie represented a fresh start. He moved into an apartment near campus and threw himself into his studies, declaring a major in political science with a minor in languages. His dream was to work for the U.S. State Department, hoping to use his language skills and interest in international relations to make a difference in the world. On campus, Matt quickly made friends. Standing just 5'2" and weighing barely 105 pounds, he had a gentle presence that drew people to him. He joined the campus LGBTQ+ association and became known for his willingness to engage in conversations about equality and human rights. Matt wasn't an activist in the traditional sense, recalled one of his professors. He just lived his life openly and honestly, which in itself was a kind of activism in Wyoming in the 1990s. Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, both 21 at the time of the crime, had very different lives from Matt's. Born and raised in Laramie, both came from troubled backgrounds marked by poverty, family instability, and substance abuse. Henderson grew up with a single mother who struggled with alcoholism. Despite this, he was generally known as the quieter, more reserved of the two. He had dropped out of high school, but earned his GED and worked various jobs around town. Those who knew him expressed shock at his involvement in such a violent crime. McKinney's background was equally troubled. He had a history of drug use, particularly methamphetamine, and had been involved in several minor run-ins with the law. He worked as a roofer when he could find work, but struggled with steady employment. His girlfriend, Kristen Price, was pregnant with their second child at the time of the crime. Both men lived on the margins of Laramie society, far removed from the university community where Matt spent most of his time. They frequented the Fireside Lounge, a local bar that drew a mixed crowd of students and townspeople. The events of October 6, 1998, began ordinarily enough. Matt attended a meeting of the University of Wyoming's Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Association, where they discussed plans for Coming Out Week. After the meeting, he went to the Fireside Lounge, a popular local bar. Security cameras would later show Matt sitting alone at the bar around midnight. McKinney and Henderson were also there, having spent the evening drinking and looking for money to buy drugs. According to later testimony, they noticed Matt and formed a plan to rob him. What happened next would be pieced together through police interviews, court testimony, and physical evidence. McKinney and Henderson approached Matt, pretending to be gay themselves. Witnesses reported seeing Matt leave with two men around midnight. Instead of taking Matt home as promised, they drove him to a remote area east of Laramie. Once there, they robbed him of his wallet, which contained $20, and his shoes. But the violence didn't stop there. They began beating him brutally, particularly targeting his head and face. The most haunting detail of the crime was what they did next. They tied Matt to a buck-rail fence, spreading his arms out in a crucifixion-like pose. The temperature that night dropped to near freezing. Matt, unconscious and bleeding, remained tied to the fence for approximately 18 hours. Before leaving, McKinney and Henderson took Matt's shoes and wallet. According to later testimony, McKinney looked back at Matt tied to the fence and said, "That's what you get for being a fag." Aaron Kreifels wasn't looking for anything unusual when he went for a bike ride on the afternoon of October 7th. The University of Wyoming freshman had simply gotten lost and was trying to find his way back to more familiar territory when his bike hit a rock, causing him to fall. When he looked up to get his bearings, he saw what he initially thought was a scarecrow tied to the fence. Something about it seemed odd, prompting him to take a closer look. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. "At first I thought it was a dummy," Kreifels later testified. "Then I saw hair, and I knew it was a person. He was bloody and barely breathing." When police and emergency medical personnel arrived at the fence, they found Matt in critical condition. His face was completely covered in blood, except for the tracks of his tears. The only part of his face not covered in blood were the clean streaks where his tears had washed the blood away. Dr. Cantway, the emergency room physician who first treated Matt, later testified that his injuries were among the worst he had ever seen. Matt's skull was fractured in multiple places, causing severe brainstem damage. He had deep lacerations on his face, head, and neck. His injuries were so severe that doctors initially couldn't perform surgery due to the extensive swelling of his brain. Matt was transferred to Poudre Valley Hospital in Fort Collins, Colorado, which had a more advanced trauma center. There, he remained in a coma for several days while his parents rushed back from Saudi Arabia to be by his side. The Laramie Police Department, led by Commander Dave O'Malley, launched an immediate investigation. Within hours, they had their first break. A young man named Max Mickelson reported finding a bloody gun in a dumpster behind his apartment complex. Near the gun, police found Matt's shoes and credit card. The gun belonged to McKinney, and both he and Henderson had been arrested on unrelated charges shortly after the attack. In custody, they were wearing clothes with Matt's blood on them. Under questioning, Henderson broke first, providing details of the crime that would later prove crucial in court. Detective Rob Debris, the lead investigator, pieced together the timeline through security camera footage, witness statements, and physical evidence. The investigation revealed that after attacking Matt, McKinney and Henderson had gone to McKinney's girlfriend's apartment, where they cleaned up and disposed of evidence. As news of the attack spread, media outlets descended on Laramie. What began as a local crime story quickly became national news. The brutal nature of the attack, combined with the apparent anti-gay motivation, struck a chord across the country. News vans lined the streets of Laramie, and reporters interviewed anyone who would talk. The small town found itself under an intense spotlight, forcing residents to confront uncomfortable questions about tolerance and acceptance in their community. Peter Jennings of ABC News broadcast live from Laramie. Ellen DeGeneres spoke at a vigil in Washington, D.C. Celebrities including Elton John and Madonna spoke out about the crime. The story wasn't just making headlines in America. International media covered it extensively, making Matt's face recognizable around the world. The prosecution, led by Cal Rarucha, built a strong case against both defendants. They faced charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. The decision to pursue the death penalty against both men was controversial, with some arguing it would only perpetuate a cycle of violence. Henderson's trial came first. In April 1999, facing overwhelming evidence, he accepted a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to felony murder and kidnapping, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. During his plea hearing, Henderson expressed remorse and apologized to the Shepard family. McKinney's trial was more contentious. His defense team initially planned to use what became known as the gay panic defense, claiming that unwanted sexual advances from Matt had triggered McKinney into a violent rage. The judge rejected this strategy. The trial revealed the full brutality of the crime. Medical experts testified about Matt's injuries in graphic detail. The prosecution demonstrated how McKinney and Henderson had deliberately targeted Matt, planning to rob him before the encounter turned violent. During the trial, Dennis Shepard gave a powerful victim impact statement that would later be widely quoted. He spoke directly to McKinney, saying, "I would like nothing better than to see you die, Mr. McKinney. However, this is the time to begin healing. I'm going to grant you life, as hard as it is for me to do so, because of Matthew." McKinney was found guilty and, like Henderson, received 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. While the trials proceeded, the nation grappled with the implications of Matt's murder. Vigils were held across the country, drawing thousands of participants. The Human Rights Campaign and other LGBTQ+ organizations used the momentum to push for hate crime legislation that would include sexual orientation. In Washington, D.C., politicians debated expanding federal hate crime laws. President Clinton spoke about the need for greater protections for LGBTQ+ Americans. The Matthew Shepard case became a rallying cry for those seeking to address discrimination and violence against the LGBTQ+ community. The fight for comprehensive hate crime legislation would take more than a decade. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act was finally signed into law by President Barack Obama in 2009. The law expanded federal hate crime categories to include crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Judy Shepard, who had become a prominent activist, stood beside President Obama as he signed the bill. She had testified before Congress multiple times, sharing Matt's story and advocating for stronger protections. The law represented a significant shift in federal recognition of LGBTQ+ rights. In December 1998, just months after Matt's death, Dennis and Judy Shepard established the Matthew Shepard Foundation. The organization's mission became threefold: to erase hate through educational programs and outreach, to advocate for LGBTQ+ equality, and to tell Matt's story to prevent similar tragedies. The foundation developed educational programs for schools, provided resources for LGBTQ+ youth, and worked with law enforcement agencies to improve their handling of hate crimes. Judy Shepard traveled extensively, speaking at colleges and events around the world. "We wanted something positive to come from this horrible situation," Judy explained in her memoir, The Meaning of Matthew. "We wanted to prevent other families from experiencing what we went through." The cultural impact of Matt's story extended into the arts. Most notably, Moises Kaufman and members of the Tectonic Theater Project created the Laramie Project, a play based on hundreds of interviews with Laramie residents conducted in the aftermath of the murder. The play became one of the most performed theater pieces in America, particularly in high schools and colleges. Its structure, presenting multiple perspectives from actual interviews, helped communities process and discuss issues of hatred and acceptance. Other artistic responses included songs by Melissa Etheridge and Elton John, documentaries, books, and numerous theatrical productions. Each work contributed to keeping Matt's story alive and relevant for new generations. The media coverage of Matt's murder marked a turning point in how LGBTQ+ issues were covered by mainstream news outlets. While earlier coverage of gay-related stories often focused on AIDS or treated gay people as curiosities, the Shepard case humanized LGBTQ+ individuals for many Americans. The extensive coverage helped change public perception. Viewers saw Dennis and Judy Shepard as grieving parents first, advocates second. The universal nature of their loss resonated with people, regardless of their views on homosexuality. Laramie itself underwent significant changes in the years following Matt's death. The university established the Rainbow Resource Center to support LGBTQ+ students. The city passed anti-discrimination ordinances and worked to rebuild its image as a welcoming community. However, tensions remained. Some residents felt their town had been unfairly portrayed as backward and intolerant. Others embraced the opportunity for change, establishing support groups and advocacy organizations. The fence where Matt was found became an unofficial memorial site, though the actual fence section was eventually removed and replaced. The university established a bench and plaque in Matt's memory, creating a permanent place for reflection. Matt's story influenced professional practices across multiple fields. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for handling hate crimes. Healthcare providers improved their understanding of LGBTQ+ patient needs. Schools implemented anti-bullying programs that specifically addressed sexual orientation and gender identity. The American Bar Association used the case to advocate against the gay panic defense strategy. Many states subsequently banned this defense tactic, which had historically been used to justify violence against LGBTQ+ individuals. The ripple effects of Matt's story extended far beyond U.S. borders. Countries around the world used the case to examine their own laws regarding hate crimes and LGBTQ+ rights. International human rights organizations incorporated Matt's story into their advocacy work. In 2018, 20 years after his death, Matt's ashes were interred at the Washington National Cathedral, making him the first gay person to be memorialized in this way. The ceremony represented both how far society had come and how much work remained to be done. As we move further into the 21st century, Matt's story continues to resonate. While significant progress has been made in LGBTQ+ rights, including the nationwide legalization of same-sex marriage in 2015, challenges remain. Hate crimes based on sexual orientation and gender identity continue to occur, making Matt's story as relevant today as it was in 1998. The impact of Matt's story can be measured not just in laws and institutions, but in individual lives. Countless people have shared how learning about Matt affected their own journey of acceptance or understanding. One such story comes from a former Laramie police officer who admitted to holding homophobic views before Matt's murder. After working on the case, he became an advocate for LGBTQ+ rights and now conducts sensitivity training for law enforcement agencies. Another comes from a mother in Kansas who, upon hearing Matt's story, chose to accept rather than reject her gay son. Judy Shepard's words about loving her son made me realize I couldn't bear to lose mine, she later wrote. In schools across America, Matt's story has become part of anti-bullying and tolerance education programs. The Matthew Shepard Foundation's Erase Hate campaign has reached millions of students, encouraging them to stand up against bullying and discrimination. Young LGBTQ+ people today may not know Matt's name, but they live in a world shaped by his story. Resources that didn't exist in 1998, gay-straight alliances in schools, LGBTQ+ youth centers, online support networks, were often created or expanded in response to his death. Police departments nationwide have transformed their approach to hate crimes since 1998. Many now have dedicated hate crimes units and LGBTQ+ liaison officers. Training programs routinely include sections on handling bias-motivated crimes and working with LGBTQ+ victims. Commander O'Malley, who led the initial investigation, became a vocal advocate for police reform. Matt's case taught us that we needed to do better, he said. Not just in investigating hate crimes, but in preventing them through community engagement and education. Religious communities have grappled with Matt's story in various ways. While some used it to reinforce anti-gay positions, many others were moved to reconsider their stance. Several denominations began processes of becoming more inclusive, citing Matt's death as a catalyst for change. The Episcopal Church's decision to inter Matt's ashes at the National Cathedral represented a significant statement about religious inclusion. The Very Rev. Randolph Marshall Hollerith said at the ceremony, "Matthew Shepard's death brought the reality of violence against LGBTQ+ people into American consciousness and awakened the conscience of a nation." The way Matt's story is told has evolved with technology. Social media has allowed for broader sharing of his story and created new platforms for advocacy. The Matthew Shepard Foundation maintains an active online presence, connecting with younger generations through digital storytelling. Annual remembrances of Matt's death now spread globally through social media, reaching people who weren't born when he died. Hashtags like Remember Matthew and Erase Hate keep his memory alive in the digital age. Despite progress, challenges remain. Hate crimes against LGBTQ+ people, particularly transgender individuals, continue to occur. Rural and conservative areas still struggle with acceptance and inclusion. The work Matt's death inspired remains unfinished. Statistics show that LGBTQ+ youth still face higher rates of bullying, homelessness, and suicide than their peers. These ongoing challenges make Matt's story and the work of the Matthew Shepard Foundation as relevant today as ever. As we look to the future, Matt's story serves as both a reminder of how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. His parents continue their work, though they've begun passing the torch to younger activists who will carry the message forward. Matthew's death was a tragedy, Judy Shepard often says, but his life and what came from it have made a difference. That's what we hold on to. The fence where Matt was found no longer stands, but its image remains powerful, a symbol of both humanity's capacity for cruelty and its potential for change. His story continues to challenge us to build a world where difference is celebrated rather than feared, where hatred gives way to understanding, and where every person can live authentically without fear. Matt Shepard was 21 years old when he died. His life was brief, but its impact continues to ripple through American society, changing hearts and minds, one person at a time. In death, he became more than a victim. He became a symbol of the ongoing struggle for human dignity and acceptance. As new generations learn his story, they join the countless others who have been moved to action by the death of a young man in Laramie, Wyoming, whose only crime was being himself. In this way, Matthew Shepard lives on, continuing to change America's heart.